Good afternoon, ladies and gents, and welcome back to Media Communication. If you remember, last week we were having quite a dry material of media effects theories. We have listed a bunch of them, such as the magic bullet theory, the two-step floor theory, the spiral of silence, uses and gratifications, which are all going to be part of the final exam. Now, today I have intended to make up for the very dry material last week and to make something fun and take a look at media psychology and how the media manipulates you and me and us in general. And I wanted to list, first of all, 3 very important theories which are related to psychology in general, and we're all playing these games, as well as the media plays these games on us. And then afterwards we will fill out a form that I most probably will pre-send it prior to the course. I will send it to you. You will need to fill it in. It's very important, ladies and gents, that you do not actually use any help from your smartphones, from the internet, because I would like you to kind of fill it out according to your present knowledge and according to the present kind of media effects on yourself, really, and to take a look at how much we are manipulated by the media in general. And then afterwards we will learn about all these manipulative techniques, and we will kind of recognize certain moments, instances when the media really got us and we didn't even recognize it. Okay, let's start off with the manipulative techniques, then we will have a look at the form. You will fill in the form. I think you will do that prior to the course, and then afterwards we will take a look at the evaluation of your forms and take a look at how much we are gullible towards the media, really. Okay, the first manipulative technique that I would like to share today is going to be the effective method for preparation, which we will call inoculation. Now, I don't really know if you know the expression inoculation. In Hungarian we call it beoltás, and sorry to the rest of the ladies and gents, I will just explain it in a second. Inoculation is when your body gets like a vaccine, when you're kind of getting an injection. That's what we call inoculation. And this whole method that I'm trying to share today with you is going to be working on the basis of this. So how does a vaccine work? When you go to the doctors for vaccination, it works that you receive into your body a really truly weak version of the vaccination, really, or of the illness itself or the virus itself. And then your body starts working against it, really, and create quite a strong kind of reaction towards the real virus. So when the real virus comes, your body will react really well and will not be affected that much. This manipulative technique works just the same way as inoculation, vaccination does, really. So what happens? In here, we are trying to give like weak arguments or just like a topic to the other person. Then don't you think this is problematic? And you're not like telling the other person what to think, because majority of us really hate to be told what to think, right? We are very much mature adults and human beings, and we don't like to kind of be told what to do, what to think. You know, it's like against our nature, really. Sometimes we are seeking help, and that's okay. Turning to our partners, mums, dads, whomever, and it's okay. But whenever somebody is just going at you that like you have to act, do, think this way, we don't like that. So if you want to actually convince somebody of your truth, or you want somebody to think according to you or your taste, this is a smart way, because you will just give them the weak argument or the weak version of the virus, and then they will think like, oh yeah, this is rather problematic. They will be kind of thinking about real arguments and real kind of ideas, because they only got a breadcrumb. They got a very weak, maybe even just bringing up the topic that, aren't you fed up of your girlfriend or your boyfriend leaving their stuff around in the flat? And only just bringing up this little question will make them think, and they will somewhat, get into this in their heads. And in the end, they will be so bothered, they will bring it up and they will create the real arguments in their heads. Very, very sneaky kind of a technique, very manipulative kind of a technique, and it's really, really hard to get it out of your heads. The Americans, oh sorry, it doesn't really work. The Americans were using this technique in a campaign, really, which was an anti-smoking campaign in the United States, and they realized in the States as well, it's all the 20th century, 1950s, 60s, that they started somewhat evaluating these manipulative technique kind of processes. And they also realized that it's much more effective than being straightforward told what to think or feel. It's better to be kind of dropping a little breadcrumb and they will create the strong argument. In the anti-smoking campaign, the high school students were prepared against peer pressure, because back in the days they realized that like bigger or older students, they started like giving cigarettes to younger students as well. And they didn't want to tell young students like don't smoke because you will die or something, but they realized that it would be much better to kind of manipulate them into creating their own arguments in their heads in order to refuse the old students' peer pressure and pressurizing towards cigarettes. It wouldn't really happen nowadays, would it? Because a pack of cigarettes is like 1,300 forints and nobody wants to be pressurizing anybody, you know, they just want to smoke their own cigarettes. But indeed, they kind of gave the weak argument to these smaller high school students that, like, do not smoke because your clothes will smell and your hair will smell and it will not be nice. And they realized when they don't tell them straightforward, like, don't smoke because it's unhealthy or something, they didn't react well. But when they gave them a weak argument, like, do not smoke because your hair will be not nice or your clothes will be stinky, they developed the real arguments and they said that, like, oh, but it's not the real problem. The real problem is that smoking can cause throat issues, lung issues, cancer, this and that and that. And it's because us humans, we really do enjoy our own ideas. We do cherish them a lot, you know. They, in the end, were much better at actually, you know, at loving their own idea of developing the real strong arguments indeed. So inoculation is all about giving a weak argument, waiting for them to work against it, and then realizing that what the real problem is, and then they will create their own real arguments, which they will love way better because we just don't like to be told what to do. Okay, raising awareness, blah, blah, blah. Good. Second manipulative technique, ladies and gents, is going to be the foot in the door technique. This is rather similar, but a little bit, it's got some differences to it. It's a compliance tactic that will involve getting a person to agree to a larger request by actually giving them a small request first. So we are setting up the person, very similar to the inoculation one, but in here, it's not them themselves working out their arguments, but in here, we've got a real big request that we want the other person to cooperate in or to do. However, we realize that we need to go small first and then actually come out with the big one. So now if we are the manipulators in here, it's us in both times coming out with the request. Okay, it's not them developing anything. They will develop in their heads, but it's us going small first and then coming out with the real request. So we come out with the request twice in this one. So in this manipulative technique, we need to get the person kind of hyped up with a modest request, okay? At the beginning, we need to be modest. We need to be really nice and hold ourselves back. Now, there was, once again in the United States, there was a very interesting, I'm not survey, but an experiment rather, where people needed to there were two people, they were going around from house to house, and they were holding a petition. And they were asking people from in their houses as well that, like, could you please sign this petition about driving safety and, like, the importance of using a safety belt and all that jazz. And people were actually very happy to sign this petition because, you know, who wouldn't say that it's important to drive safely, slowly, and wearing a safety belt? That's very, very important. So these people actually signed this petition. Majority of them, it was no problem. And then 2 weeks later, these two people who were holding the petition, they went back and they were asking them that, like, could you please allow to have a huge billboard about, like, a very big poster set up in your gardens about driving safety. And those people who signed the petition first, they were 3 times more likely to accommodate this big warning sign in their garden than those people who did not sign this petition and who were not asked to sign the petition in the first place. So what can we have as a conclusion in here? We do want to set up billboards in the gardens of people. If I just knock on the door of someone saying that like, hey, I want to set up a huge thing in your garden, are you happy to contribute? They will not be happy. But if we, prior to this event, we go up to them and we ask them to sign a petition, they will be really happy, or 3 times as likely, to allow a huge billboard in their garden than before. Why is it? Cognitive dissonance, once again, I'm assuming, because if we said 2 weeks ago that it was super important for us and we were super happy to sign a petition, we don't want to seem irrational 2 weeks later that, oh, it's very important for me, you know, but not that important to ruin my garden or something. Okay, I do have a personal example as well. I did have a colleague at my old university in the master's course. It was a good friend of mine. And she really wanted to become a mummy quite early in life. And she was already married in the master's course as well. And she really wanted to have a baby. Her husband, though, he said that, oh, let's wait for this a little. Let's just have some us time as a married couple for a while and stuff like that. So instead of going in with the big request that, like, let's have a baby tomorrow, which is a big, like, kind of a contribution to each other as well, and it's a big responsibility, the girl started saying that, like, how about having I think it was a pug or a French bulldog, having a dog. So the guy, which is like a more modest kind of a request. So the guy was super happy. He was like, okay, let's have a dog. And so they had a dog together, which they were kind of, you know, bringing up and caring for and stuff like that. And then soon the guy realized that, you know, now we have a dog, we cannot really go on holiday, we need to take care of this dog forever, and we live in a flat and it's a lot of burden anyway, so let's just have a baby as well, because now we are kind of tied home anyways and we've got responsibilities anyways, because a little puppy is like a little baby, so let's just have it. And it's crazy. Ever since then they have had 3 children. Doesn't always work, of course, because if he really didn't want anything, you know, to do with children, he wouldn't have agreed. But it was a smart way of kind of introducing the whole thing that, like, let's have a doggy first and then a baby, and then it's going to be all smooth, you know. So that's how they set it up. And it's the same manipulative technique, foot in the door. You just put in your foot, the dog, and then you put yourself inside as well with the baby project, right? It's same as this project. You put in the petition first and then all in with the billboard in the garden. Very exciting ones. Okay, that's how it works. There is the introductory request. You wait for the attitudes to change in the person, and that's when you come out with the real request as well. Gradual, progressive, very important that the introductory request is modest but not insignificant. Okay, so a dog is not insignificant. Signing a petition, giving your name and your address and personal data is not insignificant. So it has to be modest, not big enough not to be rejected, of course, but not small enough not to be dealt with, you know. So it's very important that it's very well thought out. Works every time if the other person is gettable. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Very good. Number 3. This is going to be manipulative technique number 3 that I wanted to mention to you, and that is going to be the boring experiment. Now, the boring experiment is it's also about an experiment that was done in the United States of America. Once again, we're listing these because the US was the biggest ones in the 20th century to be kind of testing cognitive psychology and cognitive issues. And so in this experiment, university students had to carry out a really dull, boring, monotonous task. They were set in a lecture room and they needed to do something extra boring. Now, upon completion the task, the experimenter had a request to these students. He asked them to say to the next group of people who were coming in that the task was actually super fun. They needed to lie that it was interesting, amusing, and like they go out, there is another group waiting there, and they needed to say that like, oh, you will be having so much fun, it's going to be so super amusing and entertaining. In turn, one part of the participants got $1, in order to lie, a little thing like that. And the other half of the participants got $20 to lie to the other group that it was actually not monotonous and boring, but it was actually fun. Now, a few days later, these participants who had to lie, and one half of it got $1, the other half of it got $20, they were asked how this whole experiment was and how they felt. And you won't believe this, it was actually interesting that, oh, sorry, I forgot to translate that bit from Hungarian, excuse me, please. So it says that, like, how enjoyable the task was. And as you can see, those people who got $1, they evaluated the task actually much more amusing, that they actually said a couple of days later that, it wasn't that monotonous, it wasn't that bad. As opposed to those people who got $20, you can see that they said that it was quite rubbish and it was really bad, and they evaluated the task close or underneath 0. So it was like even worse than 0. It was super, super boring, right? They were not even quite far from the control group who had nothing to do with the whole thing, right? So those people who got $1 they evaluated the task later way better than those people who got $20. Why is that? Once again, ladies and gents, because we keep mentioning cognitive dissonance, this has got to do something with that as well. Those people who received only $1 more likely said that the task was enjoyable a couple of days later than those who received $20. So, why is that? Cognitive dissonance. So practically, oh no, I've forgotten to put that in as well. Practically, those people who received $1 actually believe that, like, I'm not kind of a person, I'm not so cheap, I'm not a horrible person to be lying for $1. And for that reason, they started rationalizing, just as cognitive dissonance does in your head, that, like, okay, the task must have been enjoyable and not that boring, really, because I wouldn't lie for $1. I'm not a very cheap person, so I would definitely not do that. And for that reason, we can conclude that those people who got $20, they felt like, I was paid for this, it was horrible. A few days later I was asked, it was still horrible, I don't care. So in this way, this is a very interesting manipulative technique with cognitive dissonance as well. The less you pay someone, the more they will appreciate the task, because they don't want to contradict their own value systems and their own kind of evaluations towards the self, which is very bad and sad, and so many people actually abuse it in the workplace as well. Like, I'm just giving them little money or little something because they say that I'm not so stupid to be working for crap money. Oh, sorry, I'm not so stupid to be working for little money or nothing at all. So it must be a good workplace that is worthy to be staying here, and it's worthy to maybe like invest more time in this and more money in this and more energy in this, because I'm not so stupid to be wasting time at a workplace where I don't feel evaluated or valued. And that's a lot of cases, it happens in a lot of cases, when people are kind of abusing this kind of a cognitive dissonance issue. Now, we're not going into what cognitive dissonance is, because last week we got to realize, or I got to know, that you have already learned it, so I'm not going to be boring you with that. These were the 3 cognitive dissonance related kind of methods that I wanted to share with you, manipulative techniques. The media is also using these, of course, in certain ways, and I'm curious how you would translate these issues to the media, because they can be as well. But now let's take a look at the real media kind of manipulative puppet show that I wanted to show you today. And let's take a look. You needed to fill in this questionnaire, which I hope you did. And I will be very upset and inconsolable if you didn't. So let's hope that you did that. And now let's take a look at what sort of like manipulative techniques the media are using in general. They're using all of these, and the previous 3 very big like experiments as well. I've chosen those ones because they are the basis of cognitive psychology, and they are very interesting to know about, and they do have a very interesting and important research background with huge American experiments. And these rest of them, they're also, they root from cognitive psychology as well, but they are very much media specific. Let's take a look. Ignorance of statistics, very typical of us. Ungrounded optimism. That's also, like, these all are related to real life as well as the media. So ungrounded optimism, we're all about that too. Accessibility error, pinning down overconfidence, finding confirmation, increase of irrational commitment, and hindsight. These are the ones that I have listed as the most common heuristics, or like mistakes of thinking, and I wanted to share majority of them with you, which I found the most important and which I actually included in your questionnaire. Let's take a look, ladies and gents. Number one is hindsight. Okay, now in retrospective, hindsight is like looking back. In retrospective, we tend to exaggerate what we had known before. It happens a lot of the times, and regarding media cases too. We claim that the recent happenings could be predicted, and later we believe that we had been actually much wiser than we actually were. This happens all the time, right? Having found out what had happened, we often overestimate how likely the whole happening was and how smart we actually were regarding this whole thing. We often say that like, oh, there's nothing surprising about it, or I knew it would happen. No, you don't, right? Very many media happenings or happenings in the world. For example, the big economic crisis in 2008. So many people, after it had happened, so many people were like, oh, you could see it from a mile that it was coming. Or for example, when very famous people die as well, or not famous people from your average lives as well, unfortunately. It happens that like Amy Winehouse died, and I read a lot of articles and a lot of comments that like, oh, you could see it from a mile, like she was using illegal substances, drugs all the time, like who is surprised? I was surprised. Very many people can be surprised because she was 27 years old, and so many people are drug addicts the rest of their lives as well. They're huge stars, and I'm assuming rock bands and stuff like that, who are still alive. It was surprising, but we still act as if we were actually like not surprised whatsoever, because in hindsight, we just seemed to be smarter about it. And in the media and on websites as well, we could read a lot of comments when people were super smart and they had predicted the whole thing. It's also in our private lives. It's our mothers majority of times when you don't put on a jumper and you go home and you caught a cold, and they're like, I told you so. I told it 1,000 times that you will catch a cold. It's like, sometimes you catch a cold, sometimes you don't. It doesn't really. But your mum always knows it best, so it happens in the private kind of life as well. Okay. Unfortunately, that's a very important issue as well. If you've got any, not you, just in general, relatives or people committing suicide as well, this is really bad for the family, because later, because of this process, this mechanism, they believe that they were smarter, or they had been smarter previously as well, and they always say that like, I could have stopped this, I could have noticed this, blaming themselves that I did see that something was not good, I did see that something was not right, and I still didn't take a step. It's not like this. Sometimes you don't see that something is inherently wrong, and sometimes you don't, or you can't predict that tragedy will happen. So unfortunately, because of hindsight, so many relatives, friends, they start blaming themselves, thinking that they were smarter before, but they're not, and it's not how it works. It's just that it leads to a lot of self-blaming, which is not healthy, unfortunately. Ignorance of statistics. Now, we tend to ignore basic calculations, statistics, distributions of as opposed to other descriptive kind of information if it's available. It happens all the time. For example, ignorance of statistics. Smoking. I'm sorry, I don't have anything towards smokers, but all the examples are related to this one. We always believe, or drinking, for example, that like, oh, it's really bad for your lungs, or it's really bad for your liver, but it will not happen to me. I'm young, it's no problem. It can happen to a lot of people, so you need to not ignore the statistics regarding your health. We do say this when we are making such a bargain as well. You buy a really cheap car, and you say that like, I bought this car so cheap, and it's like it's gonna work. I made the biggest kind of bargain in the world. We know it that if you buy something super cheap, majority of times it's going to somewhat have costs in the end. So you buy the car cheap, and then you need to invest a lot into it to be actually functioning, and you need to be having it repaired. So the ignorance of statistics, something is extra cheap, I'm buying it and I made a huge business. No, it doesn't work that way. so many people say, unfortunately, about marriage as well. They say that, that's not that, sorry about that. Marriage, for example, you say that like, oh, this will not be happening to me, and I trust the other person, I love the other person, and they don't write a contract or a marriage contract or something because it's like really detrimental towards the relationship. And unfortunately, in Hungary, this is we do have a very high rate of divorce. Unfortunately, it's like 60% at the moment, which is like more than every second couple ends up in divorce. So it's like they say that like, oh, it won't happen to us. We know each other. It will be no problem. So the ignorance of statistics, it's like a very optimistic way of thinking, and thinking that like you did the biggest business. You will never get ill from unhealthy habits, or you will never lose any money on a marriage because you will never get divorced. These are the ways of thinking, the ignorance of statistics, which we tend to do. Accessibility error. Now, we do have a bunch of these in the questionnaire, yeah? And if I ask you, for example, out of the following companies, whose cumulative revenue, like whose yearly business intake, was the biggest, who earned the most? And here you've got Boeing, Teflon, Microsoft, Mackenson, Altria, and Valero, if that's pronounced that way. Then if I ask you, like, is it A, Boeing, Microsoft, DuPont, Teflon, or is it going to be B, the Altria Group, Valero Energy, I can't even pronounce it, I don't even know how to, or Mackenson, who would you actually choose? And of course we would go with A, because we've got access to those, because they're super loud, they've got a lot of advertisements, they're big brands, they're everywhere, Microsoft, Boeing, we all know these. But indeed, the correct answer is going to be B. Now, the whole, I'm getting messages in Teams at the moment. So the whole thing looks this way, that if you've got access through the media, for example, to a lot of issues, to a lot of advertisements, to a lot of big brands, you will be thinking that, oh, they must be huge, or they must be earning way more than other people actually, or other companies actually, when in reality the good answer is going to be B. Only because we don't have access to them in the media, it doesn't mean that they're not earning loads. Okay, so the media is going to be showing certain things, and it's also like negativity as well, that like, like coronavirus, everybody dies, everybody this and that, and we don't really show those people who are actually getting better. And we do have accessibility errors during like consumption of media, because they're showing something and not showing other things. And for that reason, we have got perceptions of issues that will kind of lead us to fake or false conclusions. It's going to be, for example, in the questionnaire, you will know that this is going to be the what caused the most deaths in Hungary, lung cancer or suicide or murder and stuff like that. I'm curious about your orders, really, because it's going to be this one, actually. Finding confirmation. Now, that's another heuristic or manipulative technique. We tend to search for information that will confirm our pre-existing opinions and knowledge. You told me, which was quite surprising, that many of you are following the news from different channels. In majority of times, really, we don't do that. We tend to be following one channel which we find trustworthy and which we find really really good and according to our taste. If we change channels, we only do so to see what the other side is lying about, and finding confirmation is going to be something we keep mentioning, that like your pre-existing knowledges are going to be somewhat like held onto and supported. Pinning down. Now, we can say, for example, pinning down, John is a qualified electrician in Boston who has got 4 years of experience. This is an example. What do you think? How much is his annual income? Our secretary of the department has estimated his wage about $40,000. Now, if I ask this from my students, they tend to say that, like, yeah, it's around $40,000 or $50,000 or something. Pinning down is actually the fact that you're given a number, and if you don't have enough knowledge about issues, then you might go and believe that number that is given to you. What would happen if I had said $80,000? We don't even know the worth of a dollar at the moment, and we don't even know who the secretary of the department is and why her whole experience would be relevant to us, So in this case, when we are given a number, and I'm very curious how much you said about Nigeria's population, because that one is going to be a pinning down. You were recommended, I think, 3 million people. And if you have got no knowledge about the real answer, you will be kind of pinned down by that number, and it will kind of hold you down, and it will kind of have you, and your thoughts. And if you don't have enough information about it, or you don't know it, then you might kind of go with the flow and say that, yeah, $40,000, or yeah, 3 or 5 million inhabitants in Nigeria, probably. Indeed, it's going to be much higher, but we will speak about it in a second in teams. Okay, so the point is, if we only have little information and we don't have background knowledges, we tend to use the little information available, hold on to it as much as possible, even if it could be considered completely irrelevant as well. Same with the wage negotiations. So if you go to a place, and I find it super, not ethical, but sometimes they are asking your previous wages, right? So you go to a job interview and they're like, what did you earn in your previous workplace? And if you say that I earned 200 euros, which is like $70,000 forints or something, right? 200 euros, then they will believe that, okay, I don't need to offer them much higher because they were fine with that anyway, so I'm just going to offer them 250 euros and they will be extra happy. Okay. Don't pin them down. Give them a higher number majority of times, or just try and avoid the situation. I mean, if they had already asked it, you can't sit there that's a secret or something. But still, you need to be kind of not answering it honestly, because this previous wage, that number, will pin them down, and they believe 200 euros, he did that or she did that for a whole month, and they were happy to work for that little money. Then I'm not going to recommend or not going to offer them much higher because they were already fine with it anyways. Don't pin them down. That's very important. Increase of irrational commitment. Now, in fact, failure does not occur due to a single decision, but a series of bad decisions. And due to the fact that we do not want to admit that the situation is not good anymore or intolerable, we will kind of increase irrational commitment. It happens all the time with bank credit as well. After a bad credit history, we don't say that oh, I'm in a huge debt and I'm going to stop it and try and pay it back. But we are getting more and more and more debts in order to kind of pay for the first one, which is really bad. In long failed projects as well, for example, it's very difficult to discontinue. You can see that it's a project which is going very much downhill, but you do not want to discontinue it because I have already started it, I have already invested it, it's a pile of, I can see it, but I'm gonna run after my sunk costs as well. So many private relationships or romantic relationships work this way as well, that oh, it's horrible, it's intolerable, we cannot even look into each other's faces, but we've been married for 40 years, so let's just run with it because we have invested so much into it, Same with employee dismissal. That's very exciting to me. It's very difficult to get rid of a colleague that you yourself hired. So if there is a boss who is hiring someone, they don't want to admit to it that he was or she was a bad decision and they don't do their job well. But because they hired it themselves, for example, the boss is hiring you, no matter how bad you are, you will stay longer than if an HR manager hired you, because the boss will not be able to admit that I made a horrible decision and this employee is just lazy, not committed, horrible, not at all a good one for the company. They will not admit that to themselves. But if the HR manager hired a bad employee, they will be get him fired or get her fired. Okay, so the increase of irrational commitment is going to be very much there in our behaviors as well. Okay, this is all I wanted. So many of these are actually included in your questionnaires, these manipulative techniques. Some of them are media related, some of them are just psychology related, but I'm extra curious how you actually executed the task. and let's see it and let's evaluate it together in Teams. Thank you so much for your attention for today, and see you in Teams in a second. Bye bye.